See what happens. Okay, there we go. Can you hear me good?
Yep.
Okay, I can hear you good. Okay, so this is a live stream interview through Twitch for Beyond Barriers with Acacia Dietz, producer of the Beyond Barriers podcast, and I am being interviewed for to talk about militant activism, Indigenous justice systems, and trying to talk to kids about extremism. So since this is
Yes.
Twitch, we have chat. Uh, I might stop and address something in chat and come back. But yeah, I'm really eager to talk about this. So thanks so much for making the time to do this. But I'll let you take it from there, and let's see what we can talk about today.
Awesome. Appreciate it. And thanks for being willing to talk to me about this because it is
Sure.
really, really, really important, I believe, for everything, really. Um, so thank you. And it's not every day. And a lot of people, at least I know, like my generation and younger, probably aren't very familiar with the Indigenous activism
Uh-uh.
such as yourself, the militant activism. So why don't you, if you would, can you briefly describe or briefly tell me about what it was that, like, what made you to decide to do militant activism? Like, what were the kinds of things that drew you to that, or um, a little bit of your background that could have led you down that path, do you think?
Joining American Indian movement.
Yes.
Well, we were as many radical groups were labeled domestic terrorists at one point, an
Mm.
extremist, because American Indian movement started in Minnesota over police brutality.
Oh, okay.
Okay, in Minnesota, and
Hmm.
police brutality of a particular nature, where it was really severe on the reservations, and you had federal agents constantly crawling around the reservations, and the conditions were fourth world.
Oh, okay.
You didn't even have tribal colleges yet.
Mm.
And it was 1968 when AIM formed, which was in the middle of everything else that was happening.
Oh, wow.
And as they say, there's a film called Real Injun, a documentary about Indians in film. And the producer says, that was cool because, like in that era, Indians were cool, they were cool.
Right.
And you would see a lot of images. You had the crying man with the trash. You had
Mm.
um, um, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest with Will Sampson, who was
Hmm.
one of the first full-blood indigenous actors in a role
Mm.
ever, of that type ever. And actually, that book was written from that character's point of view, but the producer decided to change it and create the role with Jack Nicholson,
Oh, wow.
which was
Okay.
the white character uh, in the book, which is first person narrative
Gotcha.
from the chief's point of view, his voice.
Mm.
And so he describes the other character entirely as a third person. So they reverse it.
Mm.
Um, and so AIM forms, and you had a lot of people. You had Oakes, you had Dennis Banks, you had Russell Means coming in. Russell Means was a veteran. Also, he was in South America even, I think, and he was an activist there. And he when I think he fought against the Sandinistas.
Oh,
So,
really?
yeah, I think so. Um, he became one of the most famous speakers because he was the one who led two things in particular, which was the occupation of Wounded Knee, which was the
Hmm.
standoff on the site of
Right.
the Battle of Wounded Knee,
Hmm.
and the occupation of the Bureau of Indian Affairs in D.C. So, um, so my family is the only indigenous family in our whole community. And
Oh, wow.
we're going on with the fact that uh, we could be we could actually, I guess, at that time easily be identified. People would look at us and say, you look Indian. And it's funny, I grew up and people say you look white. So I don't know what happened, but growing up,
Right.
we were stereotypical looking.
Mm. Gotcha.
And my parents had the jet black hair and the whole thing.
Mm.
Oh, and we're struggling. My brother and sister and I are struggling to try to integrate into this thing they called a congressional school, which is international students and refugees,
Hmm.
asylum seekers, diplomats, kids. Nobody uh, spoke English as their first language.
Right.
So I'm in this multicultural, multilingual environment, and I had been staying like we would stay half the year, on the reservation, or and then go back to school. And the kids had been split up, so we were all just living there in the nation's capital at the time, trying to just deal with that kind of reality, with people telling us, you can't be Indian, you're extinct. You can't
Oh,
use
wow.
your sign language that we were taught. You can't use that. Um, Being slapped in the face and having our hair pulled and being called Pocahontas and Squanto and Hiawatha and all the Thanksgiving
Terrible.
turkey jokes. We were dealing with that, trying to figure out what in the hell is that. We're
Mm.
little, and all of a sudden we hear that Alcatraz is occupied.
Mm.
So my dad gets through the news, figures it out. Well, that's it. Packs us up, all the bags, packed everything up, had all the tent poles, everything ready. Here we go. We're going to Alcatraz. That's it. Screw it.
Oh, wow.
But then the feds came and cleared everyone off the island.
Right.
So, um, we have to come back. Oh no.
Right.
And so this is where we first really hear about John Trudell, Russell Means, Dennis Banks, and AIM.
Gotcha.
Because it took the media a while to cover it. They occupied that place for a long time.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Okay.
it was a long time, and finally, you get this media coverage. All right, so all of a sudden, all the indigenous people, like all the we were in the news. That's the
Mm.
first time we'd been
Yeah.
in the news.
Mm.
You have to understand that. And
Yeah.
then
I can imagine that.
and then uh and even to this day I get them mixed up which came first. You have Wounded Knee with the
Mm.
same group, and they're armed, and the feds are coming after them, and we were like, they're gonna kill us all. So the families had to start talking to the kids at this point about activism and extremism, about being a minority, about the truth, about the history. You had to have a crash
Right.
course in what was going on.
A real
Uh,
quick crash course.
Russell Means is they survive it. Marlon Brando famously declines the Oscar. We see this beautiful indigenous woman. Again, we are at the Oscars.
Oh, wow.
Holy shit. Look, we're not dead. We exist. We're real. We really started
Exactly.
going, let's go find our people.
Mm.
And it became clear that as long as we were living in a world where it was them and just we were alien strangers, we didn't
Wow.
have people. And suddenly we had people.
Right.
And
Exactly.
they looked like Indian princesses with the feather and the beautiful regalia. They looked like chiefs. They were acting like chiefs,
Right.
warriors. And we went, shit, we didn't die at all. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is out, and then they took over the BIA. So my mother walked us down because she actually worked in a federal building, and she brought us. And she walked us
Oh wow.
down directly in front of the doorway where Russell Means was up on the stairs and the men were there with the rifles. And here was an FBI man with a sniper rifle, trained
Oh,
on the doorway, standing on the sidewalk. And my mother walks right up next to him. And so he's trying not to break concentration, but he's like, you need to clear off. And she goes, no, we don't. I brought my children here because they want to see if you're going to shoot that man in front of their face or not. And
oh
she looks
wow.
down at us and she goes, look, children, this is how your government feels about you. Take a look. Go
Mm.
ahead. And the guy
Wow.
just lost his complete composure. And
Oh,
then
I
a
bet.
bunch of other people were there as well, standing there going, right, right. If you're going to shoot him in front of the kids. So I'm
Wow.
4 years old. My brother walked across the street and they were doing something outside. And when he walked up, it was Dakota people, and they didn't speak English at that time.
Mhm.
And they got all excited because he looked like someone who had died recently.
Oh wow.
And so he explains what he's doing and what nation we are. And they were so excited that they actually did a ceremony for him,
Oh, really?
and right on the sidewalk.
Wow.
And so it was this moment of reunion and solidarity.
Mm.
And
Yep.
again, Russell Means wasn't convicted for Wounded Knee. And again, they get away with occupying the BIA. They grabs documents. It's a decade later or so that they sue the BIA with these documents that they had gotten,
Really?
showing how many
Wow.
applications they had turned down and how many actual Native Americans existed.
Mhm.
And the numbers were like 10 times higher than what was being reported. And so we
Wow.
realize there's a lot of us, right? We're not dead. We're not a dying
Right.
race. We're alive and well. We all have our different little spaces and things. Um,
Mhm.
and that you can challenge your government and survive it. But now people died. People did die. They died on Alcatraz. They died in Wounded Knee.
Right.
So I never forgot any of that. And I never forgot in retaliation, uh, the FBI burned John Trudell's wife and infant, and I think mother-in-law alive. And that was filmed by an Indian photographer, a news person. He's
Wow.
like a stringer. They didn't know he was filming, so he got the footage to the major television station, and they were showing it, and then they just pulled the plug. But it was too late. We'd seen it. We'd seen what happened.
Wow.
So after I grew up, got I had first tour in the military, which was a wartime service,
Mm.
two
What
wartime
branch of the
service,
military
Air
were
Force.
you in, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, it
Okay.
was Air
Air
Force.
Force.
And then we were trained for missile launch too. So as soon as I got out, I went to the powwow trail. I wanted to go to college, so I did. I went up into college, but I was on powwow. As soon as I graduated, I was just living on the powwow trail. We live in teepees and we go camp to camp and we site to site. And we have powwows. And the very first thing I did was walk up to the very first AIM member as a combat veteran, or they were considering me a combat veteran because they usually didn't let women in, and they had just changed that policy. And
Okay.
the first thing I did was I went ram straight to the first black shirt I saw and signed my ass up,
Hmm.
because by that time I had gone through so much persecution from law enforcement officials, Wildlife and Gaming Commission, cops,
Wow.
all these justice officials, all this prejudice. I'd already gone through all of that. I never said a word.
Of course.
And the second I found somebody who was, you know, an agent or whatever, I went straight to them. And I was
Mm.
recommended. So they put me in through the application and they gave me my card. And I said, fantastic. And they said, what are you good at? And I said, journalism. So what I would do is we would do what that one journalist did, and we would go to powwows and we would hide the journalist, the cameraman, and we would wait for an incident and he would film it all, and then we'd sneak him out and get it to the news station, and that's what I did.
Oh, wow.
And we actually busted a bunch of people. We stopped a bunch of things because by the time we'd captured the incident, got it to the news, you know, the news or the attorney general or a city official would call and say, hey, you guys, like, you better, hold on, it's my mic. Hey, you better get out of there. You're being filmed.
Mm. Yeah.
So that's what I did because that was all I could do at this point. But we were, at that point, arrested, beaten, held at gunpoint, kidnapped, shot, disappeared, and you're talking about this is the 21st century.
Right.
Yeah, we
Wow.
had so the genocide against us has not stopped. The attempts at it have not stopped at all. You you might not see it at a major powwow, but if you try to do a local powwow,
Right.
yeah. And what they do is they raid, and they're looking for what they say is they're looking for eagle feathers because it's illegal. But it's not
Why
illegal
is
for
that?
us, so they want to know if we have permits.
Oh,
Oh, hold on.
gotcha. Mm.
My mic is going crazy. Never makes a sound. Then when
Mm.
I talk, anyway. But
Of
yeah,
course.
and so that's what they're looking for, that and drugs,
Gotcha.
which they never find.
Right.
So, yeah. By that time, I mean, I'd already seen, wartime service. So the thing about it is, with AIM, you knew you could die. You knew
Right.
nobody was gonna get out of this alive. And you had to be ready to kill, and you had to be ready to die. That's militant. So I
Hmm.
grew up with it and was perfectly trained all my life, if you put it that way, for having to defend myself all my life.
Right.
I had no problem getting ready to kill or getting ready to die, but I was going to make it count
Right.
for sure. And that's what I did. That was my contribution as much as I
Gotcha.
could. And also just kind of scouting around and trying to find, moles or little infiltrators that would get in and trying to police people to make sure the wrong people weren't coming in. Because you have a lot of kind of wannabes. There's
Hmm.
white folks that will hang around and they'll
Right.
befriend somebody and you can't trust them,
Hmm.
you know. So it was like everybody would just stop speaking English and kind of freeze them out because you were never
Mm.
sure whether that was an undercover person or not. And half the time, to
Right.
tell you the truth, it was. So since
Hmm.
I was military anyway, they just put me on patrol, if you will.
Right.
And I was
And I'm
just
sure being
security.
military, you could
Oh, yeah.
as- you could spot them in a heartbeat, typically.
No, you're trained to not even guess. You don't guess. You,
Right.
you just, you know, there's a protocol for it. But
Oh, yeah, I'm sure.
I just didn't have any trouble saying, get off my land.
Right.
This is not for you. We're going to take you someplace else.
Right.
And we had a way of speaking that was kind of a code to do that. A lot of us were veterans, and we had our own code.
Mm.
And nobody knew what we were saying, and everything looked perfectly proper on the surface, and nobody got hurt. We didn't attack anybody, but we had to be that suspicious. So,
Right.
to say that it screwed up our social networks, yeah, sure.
Hmm.
But, we would lose someone every powwow. Someone was arrested or killed by law enforcement for one reason or another at virtually every powwow.
Wow.
Sometimes kids. And the last one that was so bad was where they raided and they had uh, a boy and they chased him down and had him laying face down in the ditch. And the cop cocked the gun and said, "Kiss your mom goodbye," and had the gun at the back of his head. And his mother was standing directly behind him, and she said, "Turn him over so I can see his face." He jerks up, says, "What?" She says, "Turn him over so I can see his face, because if you're going to kill him, I want to look into his eyes." And he started cussing and held the gun down again. And the kid turned over to look at his mother, and he just stared at her, and she just stared at him. And he held that gun and held that gun and held that gun till I thought his arm would crack off. And then the call
Wow.
came in, "Hey, you need to clear out." And he cussed. He cussed and he kicked the woman and he kicked the kid. And he got mad because he couldn't shoot him.
Mm.
Yeah. So, how do you talk to your kids about extremism? How do you talk to that 14-year-old about being Indian?
Right.
So, that's why I have no problem, or had, being a militant activist, because I was prepared for that kind of level of violence and all my life. I
Right.
never had a day of luxury where that didn't exist for either me or my people.
Wow.
And I thought, well, I could go get a gun because I'm a marksman, and I could do it that way, protect, defend that way. And I said, no, 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 no. What I have is a camera. I can use a camera. Yeah. So I have my network of cameramen and
That's
journalists,
awesome.
stringers. I worked with the stringers, and that was my activism. It was a more
Hmm.
peaceful, just form of activism. But
What made you?
mm,
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
no, that's it. I'm chewing gummy bears too. Sorry.
No, you're okay. You're okay. Um, Now, when you decided to stop being a militant activist, what was it that made you decide to
Mm,
say, like, put the weapons down and choose a different form of activism? Because I know you still are an activist, but you're
sure.
no longer a militant activist,
I'm
and
not
there is a
armed.
big difference.
I'm not
You're not
armed. Yeah,
armed. You're not, you know,
ready to fight.
right.
Um.
Um, Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, they say that a peace chief used to be a war chief who found out that all that loss of life wasn't worth it.
Mm,
Now, I grew up autistic too, so I was not
okay.
the chatty Cathy. So it
Right.
took me a very long time to learn how to have a conversation, if you will,
Mhm.
a casual conversation. Okay. I, I was recruited off that powwow trail to go to the university. And so there I'm struggling with the culture shock, and there I'm struggling with, communicating. And I just basically hung with all the other indigenous people. And we were all, to be honest, we were all militant. Any one of us would have been ready to pick up anything at any moment.
Mm,
And that was like, okay, we know all of our lives we're ready to fight. We don't have to come in swinging because we know what to do when the time comes. We do not always have to be on watch.
right.
And that did it. That's what did it. Realizing that we know how to fight, we know how to die, we know somebody might have to kill somebody in self defense sooner or later. And knowing that, we just disarm because it's like when the time comes, we know what to do, right? Right. Then don't worry
Right.
about it today.
Hmm.
And that's what did it. I said, okay, I'm just
Wow.
gonna go on pursue my life because I know what to do when it's like being a martial artist.
Right.
I don't have to worry or think about it and stay prepared constant. I can just let it go because I know what to do. And if I can't physically do it, I know how to guide others. And this is what needs to be done. And I
Right.
found out that the camera at that time, the camera was more powerful than the sword, if you will. That camera
Yep.
had a lot more impact on people's social standing, their jobs, and that we could reach the people. And the
Well,
people weren't having any of that, right?
exactly. And they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words. You
Oh
can,
yeah,
a lot of times you can say a lot of things and people either just aren't willing to listen, aren't willing to believe, whatever. But when they start seeing things and seeing proof of,
and
it's a little bit harder to ignore.
they can't believe it,
Mm-hmm.
and then they believe it, even though they don't want to, because they saw it
Yeah,
right in front of their face.
exactly.
So I said, there's got to be a better way to do this than getting everybody killed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's try to do it. Let's just try to show the people what's happening because really that was what AIM did. AIM got Marlon Brando. AIM got media for Alcatraz. AIM got media for BIA. Yeah, but they were using the media. And the
Mm-hmm.
public sentiment was that it was fed up with violence against Native Americans. It was fed up with all that,
Right.
you know? And so we found out the majority of the public really were behind us.
Right.
So it was use the media. That's your better weapon
Mm-hmm.
because that gets those
Absolutely.
people in charge of these people to handle their problem, their crap, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why do we always have to fix that? Okay, we didn't start the fire. We didn't cause the problem. Why I gotta fix it?
Right.
And we don't want any more standoffs. So when AIM completes its mission, there's a new generation of AIM, and they don't show up armed.
Mm.
Um, they do get hit and hurt at protests like DAPL, but it's nothing like what it was before.
Right.
Nothing at all like what it was before. And I mean, nowadays, okay, they had rubber bullets. Okay, but we never saw a rubber bullet. Okay, we just saw down,
Right.
you know. So, um, everything has changed so much. Um, people, you don't hear people say, "Oh, I thought your people went extinct." You don't hear that anymore. You
Right.
hear people trying to kind of figure out where indigenous sort of culture and philosophy sort of fits in. Like that never happened before.
Right.
They either wanted us to be all super spiritual and with the you know
Right.
um they quit asking um so can you help me find my spirit animal at a powwow? I was like, it's in the last place you left it. I'm just saying, okay? I guarantee it's in the last place you left it. Now go on now.
Go find it.
Woohoo!
Go on. Right.
Woo, woo, woo. You feel better? Okay. Here's your painted turkey feather. Thank you for your service. Yeah, let's go. Um, you got to be gentle with people like that. But and people have stopped asking us to fix them.
Mm.
They still are not used to the fact that we can sit in front of you and speak English, that we have PhDs, that we're quite modern, that we're even a bit hedonistic because we live nothing more than a grand party. So, like, Hollywood is Disneyland to us,
Right.
we can navigate the modern, the high life, the whole culture. That doesn't bother us a bit. Technology doesn't. Uh, 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 we use it readily. We adapt it readily.
Mm.
But we won't give up our language. We won't give up our culture. We won't give up our identity, and we will not give up our history. We will not forget. We will not forget. We will not
Absolutely.
forget. But we do not need the world to remember because the world was never there to begin with. So how could they remember something they never heard of anyway? It's not about them. But we will not forget.
Right.
But they can't get used to that. To sit with one of us, they won't. They like to talk about us, without us. But at least they're talking about us
Right.
because we didn't exist when I first. We
Mm.
we were not supposed to be live when I first joined. We were not supposed to exist. Matter of fact, a lot of us thought these families. We thought, oh, we the last ones because you couldn't
Mm.
find any other indigenous people. Where were they? Well, they didn't have phones.
Wow.
Half of them, no television. I mean, how could you find them? You couldn't even get off the reservation without a passport. You know, we didn't. We had lost contact with each other. So all of those
Wow.
histories and languages and cultures were just separated and shrunk.
Mm.
And you did not go out in public waving your feathers. Okay, you did not do that.
Right.
You didn't say you were Indian to anybody. You might not make it out of the house party. That was how I grew up. You just didn't say that to anybody. My mom was like, just tell them you're French. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah, you didn't say that. It was a fight. It was going to be a fight. And if you were a girl, you might not make it to 18.
Wow.
No, you seriously.
And
Mm-mm.
no, I hear you loud and clear. Like I'm starting to I remember we had uh lost Sue on Beyond Barriers podcast, and we're talking about the 60 scoop, and I had never even heard anything about that. And
Oh,
he had
oh,
mentioned about the Indigenous girls that were going
oh.
missing in Canada and still going missing in Canada. And I just saw a news article the other day about Indigenous girls going missing here in the US. I
Yeah,
will have to find it and send you the link for it. But
yeah.
um,
The
so you
numbers.
mentioning about going missing and this and that and everything
Oh,
else.
yeah.
And it's for a lot of us, and I think especially like, you know, being white, we don't think about it. Um, just because it's not something that we ever have had to personally deal with because of our skin color. We didn't have to worry about being,
Mm, mm,
picked up or whatever, or,
mm,
because this is just the
mm,
norm. But
mm.
we would never even I would have never even thought, like, why in the world would people do this, let alone why in the world would it go, quote unquote, almost unnoticed? Like
Well,
these I understand why, because many dehumanize and think that because you're indigenous you're less than, which is complete and utter BS and is completely wrong. Um so
mm,
in that sense, it does go unnoticed, but it shouldn't. It's wrong. It should not go unnoticed at all. and these things need to be known. Um, they really do.
The
And I
numbers,
appreciate you guys
the
talking
numbers
about it, and I
of,
appreciate you talking about it.
the numbers of missing women and girls because of the population size is equivalent to genocide, and there have been several bands who have had to dissolve because they lost all their women. There was no way
Hmm.
for anyone to have children. According to membership, you had to be indigenous to a certain degree, and they had lost all the women of childbearing
Mm,
age, and so they had to dissolve because they had no future. So that's genocide.
that's, ugh. Yeah, that is genocide. Yeah.
It's genocide. And the white people surrounding those bands know very well what those populations are because the state hosts a reservation, and so therefore they're very well aware. Um, some of the people apprehended have declared they've got the, what is it, the 14 words and the whole neo-Nazi motto, and that they've said in court that they did this to exterminate the inferior subhumans, and the jury let them go. Let them go for, I'm not even going to describe what they did to one woman,
Right.
but think Rosemary's Baby and Charles Manson. Put that together, and they let them go.
Wow. Mm. Wow.
And that was 2 years ago.
Hmm. Wow.
So, one of the real incidences, I think, that I think was one of those I had to go decide how I wanted to take this was when the news, we used to have this sort of network of news. Powwow was great for it because the powwow people came from all reservations and they had a way
Hmm.
of staying in touch. For instance, the dancers had sponsors, right? Well,
Hmm.
the sponsors fixed it to where the dancer could call in. And so we would have this network, because we didn't have the
Hmm.
phones and the computers. We didn't have any of that. But the sponsors
Right.
did, so the dancers did. So the dancers were the birds on the wire.
Mm.
All right. And you couldn't touch them and you couldn't really talk to them. So they were protected. And we would
Wow.
wait to hear the word, and the dancer would come in and they would bring a note or say something to the head man, and we'd hear somebody was shot, somebody kidnapped, somebody missing, and we would hear it. And then you'd have that drum that say, "Hey, that's your band. You're gonna have to go home." And then we would have to get them home to see what was going on, because that could have been a relative of theirs. There was no way to know what was going on. And one of the incidences was a young man who was walking across the field. So the I think it was the Rangers, the Forest Rangers, caught him and tied him up to a fence post with barbed wire and used him for target practice. And left him there.
Wow.
And he was 16 years old. They left him there. So, one thing about talking to kids about extremism, people say, "Why would you introduce that?" And I said, "You do understand they are themselves a target. If you
Right.
don't tell them what can happen, they're going to end up on that fence post one day because they never saw it coming."
Mm.
And white people can be targets too.
Hmm.
Look what they did to the young gay boy. It was the same thing. Left him
Yeah.
tied up to a fence post like that. Matthew
Horrendous.
Shepard. Matthew Shepard, 17 years old. All the boys on the football team. Woohoo!
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. All it takes is that you're in the wrong place at the wrong time or you're just a little bit different or you happen to be at hand. And it could be your son, your daughter.
Right.
So you got to talk to young people about what this really is and talk to them until
Hmm.
they throw up from it because they have trouble dealing with it. Okay, try living with it.
Right.
Try dying with it. They're not really children.
Right.
They're young adults coming up in the world
Hmm.
and they need to know things about this. They have to know all good and all bad. And they
Yeah,
have their own decisions to make too.
exactly.
The danger in when you open these up is look how it just occupies your mind. Look how it fills you up, and it'll fill you up full of
Hmm.
fear and hatred and
Right.
despair. And that's the perfect recipe for destruction.
Oh, absolutely.
But then you cap it off with privilege,
Mm.
and you have yourself a extremist supremacy group, basically.
Right.
So there you go.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. Wow.
That's
Yeah, I know it's
wow.
strange when we talk to you about your background in extremist, and
Hmm.
it's not to belittle the situation, but I have to go,
Oh, I know.
you know, I go, mm-hmm. I think I'd
Right.
said it before. I was like, well, what's your kill tally, really? And
Right.
you know, because like you, I'm like, I see that you're ready to fight, but I see more and more people are willing to kill and be killed. That's when I know it's bad. When you're
Yeah.
willing to fight, of course you are. Willing to kill and
Hmm.
be killed, that's a whole nother level.
It's a different level. Yeah. Yeah.
And you say, oh, they psycho, they're mentally ill, they're this. And I'm like, well, no, indigenous people have been at that level. So what's to say that the white person with that perfect combination, right, hasn't
Mhm.
grown up in that same soup?
Right.
Timothy McVeigh bombed that building because he saw Waco.
Hmm.
And he might have been off because
Yeah.
evidently his mental status evaluation showed he had tendencies, but that he was
Mm.
not mentally ill. So, but it filled his mind, consumed his mind, and it was just
Right.
every failure, every hypocrisy, hypocritical thing. He was decorated in wartime service. That'll do it. You're
Hmm.
not afraid to kill. You're not afraid to die. Um, so he was just that exact combination of oh shit
Right.
and all
Exactly.
and yeah, and that was it. And then he had a partner too, although people leave him out of the story. So anyway, point being, stuff doesn't happen in a vacuum.
No. No. And a
And
lot of people don't, just because you don't want to admit something's there in front of your face, or you don't want to talk about the elephant in the room, doesn't make the elephant go away.
no, it doesn't. It's
So,
gonna step all over you.
right, exactly. It'll trample you in the process, and anybody else that's in that room if you don't do something about it, if you don't talk about it. Um, because that's why, like, I think it is so important now that, like, we not only educate our kids on um, on not going into like an extremist movement or stuff like that. There is a lot of focus on that, and there should be. But it's more of explaining life and how we're supposed to have dialogue. I mean, we're supposed to converse with one another and treat each other with dignity,
Hmm.
because a lot of these things, much like yourself with AIM and the militant activists, it was started as a response to injustices.
Yes.
there's a lot of movements and a lot of, violent movements and extremist things that are started because of as a response to injustices. I know it doesn't make it right, but there are a lot of times within these things valid grievances,
Of
such
course.
as everything that happened with the Indigenous, with, you know, taking your people and, crashing the powwow because they wanted to try and find something, you know? So, at least my opinion would be, why don't we try to start addressing what those grievances are
Hmm.
to try to fix those versus just vilifying everybody?
Yeah. Well, sure. I mean,
And that's kind of what you do now a
that's
lot.
what
I
I
know
do
with like
now.
your Twitch
That's what I do
is,
now. Is I open a panel where you can come in, and as long as you have, if you're coming in good faith, whatever it is, whatever story you're bringing, you can lay it on the table, and we're going to treat it like the most fascinating thing in the world because you're a human being,
mm,
and everything in the world and all your ancestors is what it took to bring you here. And in my tradition, EU, we have the concept Uchita, which is your nature, which is your path. And the worst thing you can do is deliberately obstruct someone's path. And when people come into the chat, talk show, and podcast, they can actually be heard, and they can actually, and so they actually talk.
right.
Um, we've had some people come in who said they call themselves tankies, which I'm like, I don't quite get that. I guess they mean they're pro-Russian or something. I don't know. But they're very militant, and we've had a couple that came in, and I said, "Well, tell me about that. I don't know anything about that. I don't understand it. So, do you know anything
Right.
about Russia? I certainly do. Soviet
Right.
Union during the Cold War. Let's go. Let's have a conversation. Well, so we have this history conversation. We're sharing history, and all of a sudden, this guy just disarms and just sits there, and he's like, you know, this has been a good conversation. I said, well, I appreciate what you've taught me. Come
Mm,
back and you can teach history on my stream. You can present if you'd want to. Well, he went back and did a little paper up, and he didn't really present it on stream, but he did this little paper, this little essay,
oh, wow.
this little history thing, and said maybe you can share that with people. I really want them to understand. And I went, yes, I know that. I know that you're misunderstood. So, and we got to share that. And another one had said that he was very antagonistic, and when he realized he was going to be allowed to say exactly what he wanted, no matter how, quote, controversial, as long as it was in respect, then we were going to listen and include him in the
Mm.
discourse. And he just did a complete 180.
Oh, yeah.
He said, I can't talk in anywhere, in any chat. And I was like, well, I mean, you can talk, we'll listen to you here.
Right.
So go ahead and tell us where you're coming from. He was a
Hmm.
conservative, but he had valid grievances, and somebody needed to listen to him. And he felt so much more relaxed. He was having such a much better time interacting. He could make concessions after a while, and he comes in and now and then, and he's just very positive and happy, and he's a friend. You know, he's always welcome. So we have situations like that, and that's what I do now. Is well, let me just listen to you, because I know what an
Right.
enemy is, and I keep reminding myself I don't care who I'm sitting in front of, because I know what to do.
Right.
But I don't understand this enemy,
Hmm.
you know, and maybe there's a chance where that enemy could become an ally, but it
Right.
won't happen if I
Exactly.
don't listen to them.
Yep. Absolutely. And
Yeah.
that's one of the things I remember when I actually had first met you. I was introduced to you through another streamer and
Lawsuit. Yeah, that's my Dakota
lost
brother.
too.
My Dakota
Yes.
brother. Yeah. Mikola.
Amazing,
Mikola.
amazing person.
He's a sun dancer.
He
Yeah.
he uh he's like, hey, I think you should really meet somebody. And I'm like, okay. So I listened in um on a couple of them, and I know we had talked about all sorts of different stuff on them. And I have a son that is on the autism spectrum too. So that was, and then hearing about you with the autism and stuff. So that was one thing that obviously caught my attention. And that was before I knew any of this. And then I remember I came in on your stream one day and I forget exactly what it was we were talking about, but I think it was something on the far right or whatever. And at this point, I mean, Lost Sue knew my history, but I wasn't real public yet
No, no.
with my history, at least not with, some of the Twitch community and everything else, because I wasn't exactly sure how they would react or respond to it. So
Yeah.
then I remember I mentioned on your stream, I'm like, believe me, if you haven't scared me away by now, you're not going to, blah, blah. And you're like, oh, so, look, tell me about yourself. Tell me about your history. And I was
Yeah,
like,
yeah. The chat was like, uh,
oh,
uh, uh.
crap.
That story is so funny because it shows how I'm so non-judgmental and so ignorant. And
Exactly.
and they said, oh, oh, NSM. I said, oh, what's NS? What is that? Not non-sufficient money. What is that? And they go, no, no, National Socialist Movement. And I go, well, just a minute. I cover actually as a journalist and in human rights a lot of National Socialist movements. I'm like,
Right.
which one? They're like in the U.S. I'm like in the U. National So. What party is that? No, no, no. NAZI. And I went, there's no Nazi party in the U. What? Oh no, she used to be with the, and then the, oh.
Right.
And I went, "Pfft," because at first I thought, well, she must be really old if she can talk about the Nazi party.
Right.
And I'm like going,
Yeah.
what, no, skinheads? And then let me just look at it. Oh, I get it. And the first thing I said was, get on in here right now. I don't want to talk
Oh,
to
yeah.
anybody else but you. I want to hear all about this. And threw you on a microphone and
Oh,
was
yeah.
just astounded and, oh my God. And then I realized, oh, who I was talking to. And I said, now this is somebody's voice nobody wants to hear. So that means I'm obligated to listen to this because that's one of our most time honored stories was about what happens if you silence somebody.
Mm.
And
Right.
I don't have really time to tell that story now, but it has an ending where a guardian was silenced for being unwelcome, uninviting, had a contrary point of view, always said the things nobody wanted to hear, always reminding them, right? But this
Mm-hmm.
is the guardian's nature, and they silenced the guardian. And the council
Mm.
that did it was attacked and turned around and confronted the guardian who's lying on the ground with his chin in his paws like this, of course, unable to speak. And they said, why didn't you say something? And he never spoke again
Wow.
because he could, but he wouldn't, to remind you what silence means.
Right.
So a voice that comes from, the far anything,
Oh, yeah.
that's what happens when you silence people.
Mm-hmm.
It turns around and you pay for it in the end.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
Oh, yeah.
that's that's it. So I said, "Oh, I'm a storyteller and a story collector, and I will never have a chance to hear this again." So, and you obliged me, and It's such a good thing that you did because I really feel like there is nobody else who has this story.
Same like you.
Oh, there
You
was a
have a
bunch of
story
us. We just
unlike
most of it.
anybody.
Oh no, there used to be a lot of us. Now there's only me. Most of us didn't survive, I'm afraid. So,
You
but
did,
I did.
so you can tell the stories,
I can tell the
and
stories. Yeah,
you can
I can listen.
help this generation and the next generation learn, and to, like you said, listen, to listen to one another, to, you know, I, going back to the whole discussion and listening and being heard, like when I came on your stream and you're like, oh, no, everybody, you know what? You're just going to sit and listen.
Right. I said,
And I was
don't
completely
say a
blown
word.
away. I'm like, what?
I was like, do not
Like,
say one word. That's it. I will ban you immediately if you say one word. Let me listen. And they just um it was a wow. And then they said, well, that's what happens when you actually are willing to sit and listen to someone. Like
yeah,
it works out. It's fine. Because there's a story that people try to interrupt, and I'm like, if you would let it get to the end, you might find out that it doesn't turn out as bad as you think it is.
right.
One thing.
Exactly.
But that whole let's
Exactly.
just shout you down, interrupt that discourse. I'm like, why are you even trying to use language? Because you sound like a pack of baboons at this point,
Right.
howling
Yelling and screaming in each other's faces
and
gets you where?
flinging poo like a monkey does. You sound like a pack
Hmm.
of baboons just howling at each other right now. Right, right, right. It's stupid. It's stupid. It's posturing. It's ridiculous, and it's embarrassing.
Absolutely.
And that's not how you
Absolutely.
use language. And I'm like, oh, well, see, they're not there to talk, though, really. They're there to fight. They're there to hurt each other. Oh, well, then why are you bothering using words at all? Because
Right.
get to it. Either get to it or get off the field.
Right.
So in my day, yeah, no, you got that. You got that. Whatever had to happen. You got that done. That's it. Because you didn't
Wow.
have a whole lot of time to hang around. Because if they came, that was it. You had to
Right.
act.
Exactly.
There was nothing you could. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So all this, you know, name calling. Rah, 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 rah. I'm like, oh my god. And,
Well, I know I appreciate what you do a lot, probably more than you even realize, because, obviously, we come from practically two complete separate ends of the spectrum
yeah.
in many ways. Um, and, you know,
Hmm.
here we are now talking about how to talk to each other, how to have discourse, how to, you know, communicate effectively.
Yeah.
And, you know, instead of communicating with your fists, which do nothing to actually solve issues,
Hmm.
it's not, some people it might make them feel better, but it doesn't actually do anything productive to produce positive results. Um,
No, fists tend to stop things, not
exactly.
help things develop. That's true.
And that's what we need to do. And that's what we need to learn to do. Because I think many times, and you can see it in society now, with everything that we're so used to just dealing with one another physically instead of stopping and thinking
Mhm.
and listening.
Mhm.
Just listen. Doesn't mean you have to like what somebody's saying. It could be horrible and horrendous and could despise it. But if you at least show them the humanity and listen and the dignity and the respect that they deserve, maybe for no other reason than the fact that they are actually a human being. There are some people that, like, if they were not human, in my opinion, they probably wouldn't deserve to be listened to. But show them the common courtesy and decency of being a human and listening. And 9 times out of 10, that will, in and of itself, start to disarm somebody that is hostile.
Hmm. Well, I think so. You shouldn't declare a person an enemy before they've proven themselves to be one.
Exactly. Yep.
You know, so you got to listen
Oh, yeah.
carefully and strategically because you can't be fooled to expect that everybody's genuine and there's just this soft little bubblegum heart underneath all that. No, sometimes there are monsters. So you do have
Right.
to listen, and you do have to listen carefully. But
Mm-hmm.
disrespecting somebody um, is never necessary, actually. I mean, you could
Right.
have somebody going off and you just tap them out and remove them physically from the building. And you could do that without ever once disrespecting them.
Yeah.
So it's never necessary. Ever.
Right. I agree.
It's just name calling.
Mm-hmm. It's bullying.
Eh, I guess, whatever you call that. Sniping
Well,
or
some people, not
bullying,
everybody, but
depending on
yeah, depending on who's doing it and
who,
whatnot.
well,
But
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Who started first? Yeah.
right.
Excuse me. But yeah. So you got kids, and so and I have to talk to young students sometimes, and of course I'll
Mm-hmm.
obviously have to have those family conversations
Right.
where and kids will. I mean, I've been to functions or been to people's houses for a gathering, and they have the kids, and they brought the kids around to talk about the truth about Native American history or something. They talk about
Mm.
putting you on the spot. You know what I
Right.
mean? You trying to go to a barbecue and here they just dump their kids like you wanna you're like, oh my god.
Right.
What do you know about it is what I always ask first. Why don't you tell me what you know? And I'll tell you if you're right. How about that? That's how I start that conversation.
Wow.
And then I'll tell you why you're right or why you're wrong. I'll give you a story. That's how I do it.
Mm.
Yeah. They're engaged and they're learning. And it's relevant to them because they can only handle, that much. Um, so, and that's how I talk to them basically when it comes to that. Because I have to work with a lot of refugee families too. And I had the kids will ask me, why? And I'll tell them the Native American story. And in that story, they'll see themselves. And in that story, they'll sort of come to an understanding. And I'll ask them, now, why do you think? Why do you think? And they'll give me
Right.
their interpretation based on that story that we sort of shared. These are really, really painful, gutting moments. And this is the ultimate outcome of all this violence is these children.
Right.
Watching it eat them up alive and ruin their lives. And that's ultimately all this has ever led to.
Yeah.
So I don't want to have to, I cannot have kids, but I don't want to have to sit there and tell these stories to children.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to have to tell that 14-year-old young man, um, this is what you do when the police come for you.
Right.
You know, no, you can't have a gun because you're likely to use it because you're probably going to have to.
Mm.
I want to tell that 14-year-old girl you can't you can't go around in your finest and
Right.
walk home. Yeah, not you. Oh, she can. That girl over there can, but not you. I don't want to have to tell them that.
Right.
I don't want to have to tell them why they can't look up their own genealogy because there's too many cut branches.
Mm.
you know. And I have my stories of growing up, and I'll tell them if I have to, but I'm tired of having to tell them. Tired of having to tell them
Right.
because there's no way for anyone to understand what it what growing up with that kind of extremism all around you is like without these stories. And I'd rather talk about all the good times that we had, but nobody would understand that unless you were indigenous. You wouldn't get it. So the only
Right.
stories left on the table are the horrible ones, and that makes me mad.
Oh, I bet.
So you know, try to tell this to children, okay? Because this happened. This is real. This happened.
Right.
This is part of their history
Yep.
because they in this country. Um, how do you talk to them about the difference between militant act, all those nuances, militant activism, radicals, extremists, alt right, far right? What's a
Yep.
KKK? What's a neo-Nazi? Why don't they
Right.
get along? I mean, how do you talk to them
Exactly.
about this? How do you talk to them about Christchurch? School shootings,
I still remember,
gangs. Go ahead.
yeah, I remember when Columbine happened,
Oh, yeah, I remember
and like,
that.
yeah,
Um,
that was my first time. I was very, very sheltered young when I was young. Um, Literally, like, I would, my mother would tape videos, movies off of your regular network television. We didn't have cable, and she would go in and re-edit them for language and content. So when I say I was sheltered, I mean I was sheltered. So when Columbine happened and the violence, I mean that shook the nation anyway. But for me, I remember how like I had never been subjected to anything like that before, or you know, I was very naive and I didn't know the horrors that the world could hold at times. Um, but yeah, I mean, how at some point you have to talk to your children about these issues, and it's very difficult to do so. You know, I have three boys, and two of which are teenagers now, and so they're old enough now. And but that's one thing I learned at least is that you can't shelter kids forever, and the more you shelter them, it's not always the best. But yeah, I apologize. I didn't mean to cut you off there, but that just reminded me, like you said, the
mm-mm.
how do you talk to, you know, the kids about this? Like,
Okay, so they see it everywhere anyway.
exactly. Exactly.
So you just make it part of the conversation. You just make it part of the conversation, and it stays part of the conversation because it's not going to go away.
Mm-mm.
Okay, and they're just going to see it anyway. Only they're going to see it in ignorance or hear it in ignorance. So before Columbine, I think Jonestown was the world's greatest shock of that type.
Right.
And I was young enough when Jonestown happened, and I remember the parents reacting. Uh, of course, they did a documentary very quickly because people had
Mhm.
to try to understand it. And I remember all the parents got together and decided, well, whose house could you go to watch this? Because you couldn't watch it by yourself. They wouldn't let you watch it by yourself. And I remember my friends throwing up, getting up and throwing up in the middle of it. And the looks on their parents' faces was that it was so tragic that their child had to watch this. They went
Mm,
into shock. They had trauma. They had to be sedated, and they wanted their children to know that they would never feed them Kool-Aid. They wanted them to know how lucky they were, and they wanted them to know never, never, never to fall for this. So they had to subject them to it, and it's awfully gross, beyond
mhm.
grotesque. And um, the schools let the kids out for a couple of weeks because they were that devastating. Because this wasn't kids shooting kids, this was parents killing
Right.
their own children.
Yep.
And that trauma, I don't think actually ever resolved. I think people still to this day have nightmares about that.
Oh, I'm sure they do.
You
I'm
can't
sure they
even,
do.
yeah. It's why you don't see it mentioned anywhere because it's just too awful.
Hmm.
It's too awful. Um, um,
Actually, just watched a documentary on it. I didn't even really, I heard about Jonestown before, but I never knew exactly, what it was or whatever. And
mm-mm.
yeah, I'm sure, like you said, there are people that trauma like that it just doesn't go away.
No, it was nobody was interested in trying to understand how that happened, and it was the same old cult thing, and they got us, and I went, but you killed your child,
Hmm.
and you left, and you're still alive. No one's interested in that voice.
It's
That's another
crazy.
voice no one wants to hear. But if we don't hear it, we can't understand what happened to the Manson family.
Hmm.
We can't understand child soldiers. We can't understand Vietnam and why they would strap grenades to their babies. We can't understand any of it. And we don't understand why religion has such a powerful hold. There's a lot of things we don't understand if we can't hear the horrible
Right.
from the monsters themselves. And then you realize you have this shattered human being, but they're still a human being. So, this is the thing that you go through. When you talk to kids about extremism, you have to gauge them. They're going to get distraught. They're going to stay up at night. They might have nightmares. They might throw up. Let them. Take them out of school for a week. Take them out on tour. When they took the
Hmm.
monuments down, I thought this is not a good thing. I had a whole branch of my family lynched. And I said, I want people to know what happened.
Exactly.
You're erasing him.
Hmm.
Shoot. Put him up in a museum and make it a tour.
Make it educational.
Yeah.
It becomes a learning
Yes.
experience
Yeah.
rather than a celebratory because
Yeah.
when they were starting to take down the monuments and stuff like that, it's like, yeah, I agree. These things shouldn't be praised, but you can't just take it down because it's an ugly part of history. Because if you don't learn from that, and if you aren't educated on it, how often has history repeated itself over the ages because individuals chose to delete or erase the bad, horrible things instead of hearing from them and learning from them?
The lives of the murdered and missing have been deleted. They've never been documented because they're gone. Without the monuments their killers erected, no family can walk and say, see, this is what your government thinks of you. Only oral tradition remains of us. It's not
Hmm.
like we can just flip a book and say, I don't need the monument, I have this movie, I have this book. No, you don't. We don't exist anywhere. The people that held these stories are gone. You took them down, you took the monuments down. What proof have I got?
Hmm. So in
They're
some
gonna they're,
ways,
they're gonna
those
be more
were kind of like your
susceptible.
storybook.
They're gonna be more susceptible to it because there's no proof. There's no proof of what this is.
Absolutely.
That's what I mean. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah. Kids have to be afraid of something to be on guard. They have to be thinking. Kids have to be upset by something uh, to care. They have to cry like the Tin Man, who knows he has a heart because it's breaking.
Right.
That's how they have to be. They have to learn all this stuff, for the first time.
Right.
Trying to protect them out of that is meaning you're raising children and not adults, or you're keeping pets that are just there to entertain you and make the guests laugh. And I'm like, boy, your kids are sitting ducks, you know.
Right.
And if the racial violence gets too much worse, you're gonna go walking down the road and somebody's looking for vengeance, not justice, and then you're gonna
Yep.
have that conversation. Well, how are you gonna explain that? Like you said, your son, you had to tell him he was getting bullied because you were in an all-black neighborhood.
Yep.
And so suffice it to
Yeah.
say, the children bullying him must have been black folks. And you had to tell them they didn't do that because of the color of your skin or because of the color of
Exactly.
theirs. They did that. Well, you had to tell them whatever. You had to tell them. But you had to tell them what was happening.
Exactly.
Because how easily, you know, would that have
Well, and
become a racist moment, you know?
absolutely. Absolutely. And that's why I told him, I'm like, look, because they were bullying him mainly because he was one of the only white kids in the neighborhood and he was a little bit socially awkward too. But that experience for him could have easily created a lot of racism because, yeah, he was hurt. He was physically hurt. He was bullied and, he was
Yeah.
emotionally hurt. But I reminded him,
Jeez.
there's other issues. Those kids aren't doing it because of what color they are or because of what color you are. It's an excuse. There are more issues at play. You know,
It's
you
bigger than
don't know
that.
what's going on in that kid's home. You don't know, you don't know why. And sometimes you won't ever know why. But you can't, you do not have control over somebody else's actions, but you do have control over how you respond.
Or how you respond, right? Most of the
Yep.
time, you do. Hmm.
Right. And that's what I try to teach them that, you cannot control somebody else's actions or somebody else's response, but you can
Hmm.
choose
Hmm.
how you are going to respond back or not respond.
Yeah, you can choose how you feel too.
Hmm.
Um,
Yep.
but it's no, I mean, one of the greatest grievances between races is that the child who every day of their life had to walk around surrounded by enemies in fear, never being able to socialize because they were the wrong color.
Mm.
And then uptown is the privileged white kid who plays video games and watches SpongeBob Square. And his parents don't have the nerve to even have a conversation about civil rights movement. And I still say, you don't like how it feels? Try living with it. The fact, the
Right.
reality that we have to live with this every day means you need to grow a backbone and have these conversations with your children because one day it's going to be them, not us.
Mm.
Because hatred works like that, it finds its way around the circle.
Yep.
Privilege is a carnival that's seasonal, and the big top crumbles down and the flag goes to someone else.
Yep. Oh yeah.
So that's what I say. Um, no, let your children socialize with people of other languages, races, ethnicities, and religions, especially religions,
Yeah.
especially religions. And um, I noticed one thing I'd have to say, maybe, I'm not sure, but it seemed like the Caucasian people I knew had a thing about that was fine as long as those kids came to our house where we could keep an eye on them, kind of thing. But their kids weren't allowed to spend the night over there at the colored kids' house. Like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that kind of thing is still happening or going on, but you know, I think parents in the communities ought to get together, inform, organize social groups and networks for their children where everybody knows where their kids are
Mm-hmm.
and everybody's over at everybody else's house, and that's just fine. And that the
Yeah.
children should be taught to learn to respect the traditions of others. And like I said, the food, the religion, the spirituality.
Yep.
That children should learn that the rules in that house belong to that house. Learn the rules
Exactly.
before
Yep.
you play the game.
Mm-hmm.
That they should be taught with that. If they're taught with that, they're going to see discrimination because somebody's going to say something to one of their friends eventually.
Mm.
The family's going to sit down and talk about it eventually. But they'll be able to field those discussions because they've already been exposed to difference.
Right.
They're open minded, I think, as your partner would say. You've got to keep them open minded but not naive.
Exactly. Yep. And I definitely agree with that.
Hmm.
Definitely agree with that a lot.
Yeah.
It's very important.
And they've got to love their friends. They got to fall in love with their friends. You got to let them.
Yep.
Because eight
Oh
year
yeah.
olds break up 8 year olds one time and all hell breaks loose.
Right.
Especially the girls. Oh my goodness.
Oh my goodness, yes. Oh yeah.
Just try and get in between them. Let them fall in love with their friends. So that means they have to have a lot of different kind of friends.
Exactly.
And they're going to carry the love with them
Mm-hmm.
and the outrage. And they'll throw
Yep.
up when they see something horrible, like a human being would. Let them.
Yeah.
Let them be upset.
Yep.
Stop trying to protect them. They
It
can protect
creates
us.
character and endurance.
Yeah. I mean, how are you going to protect somebody from something that has happened already?
Mm-hmm.
That happened. Okay. Yeah. So that's
Yep.
how I say talk to the kids. I don't think the parents are brave enough and courageous enough because I actually think the kids aren't the ones having any problem whatsoever.
Oh, it's
I,
more the parents. It's
it's the
it's the
parents.
adults.
It's definitely.
And it gets passed down to the kids a lot of times because the kids look to us adults to learn how to act.
Yo, yeah.
And if we're not acting like we should, they pick up on it. And some will repeat it because that's what they're around.
That's how you're
So we
supposed to
got to
do.
teach
Yeah.
them differently.
Hmm. Well, and so they need a lot of diversity to learn a lot of different ways to deal with things, is what I'm saying.
Exactly. Oh, yeah.
And that's it. And that's how you talk to kids about extremism. is let them meet and live and stay with families who have been targets of it. That's
Mm,
one good way to do it,
yep.
because then it's coming, they experience it firsthand,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Exactly.
and they'll, huh, what is this all about? Maybe they'll want to do something about it. Maybe they'll want to get their friends together and say, how about we make sure, like those bullies or whatever they are, that they're not welcome here.
Mm,
Like maybe we should shut our friends down if we hear them talking like that and tell them it's not cool.
right.
Let them take responsibility in their own small sphere and let them have the competence and the confidence and develop the wisdom.
That's the only way they're going to grow and learn. That's the only way we grow and learn as human beings,
Mm-hmm,
you know?
mm-hmm.
And
Let them go stay with a relative that lives in a riverboat, right? Expose them to as much diversity, but I don't mean just go to a Chinese restaurant. That's not diversity. Um, attend a bat mitzvah. That's not diversity. I mean, let them make relationships young.
get to know people, actually know them, not just, yeah, meeting different people is good.
Yay.
But those lessons aren't as, those lessons don't stick like actually getting to know somebody and having a personal relationship with a person. Um,
Mm-hmm,
that is what really, really counts because that's where we learn that there's more that we have in common than what we don't. And those things that make us different can actually be celebrated instead of feared. So,
mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's how you talk to them. Is you have to start with your friends. You have to start go out of your way to introduce them to diversity in the population. Go out of your way to make sure they have a diverse group of friends. Don't accept a homogenous group of friends because you think it makes them safer. It makes them fragile.
it makes them more susceptible to
Mm-hmm.
the extremisms. It makes them more acceptable to think that, or susceptible to think that if this doesn't fit inside my box, then it is wrong
Mm-hmm.
and it should either be feared or stayed away from, or it creates the vision of the other,
Mm-hmm.
and the other becomes the enemy.
It becomes, well, it's usually exotic. It becomes sexualized, fetishized, phobicized. So you have a paraphilia happening. So that homogenous safety and security is actually like herd immunity. Once your child steps outside the white pristine lily field, he's a goner. It's like herd immunity. He has not developed the strength and the capacity and the tolerance for diversity that he needs to navigate his own life, let alone society. So the
Right.
pushback against that is to have the field be all lilies. Well, that'll solve it. We'll have a lathe of heaven. We'll just make everything the same exact color, and then, well, there they go. And I'm like, that's a lot of time, effort, money wasted on what could have been just learning how to get along.
Exactly.
One generation could have fixed that, but you spent 500 years trying to grow lilies. And lilies is all I see lying on children's chests in caskets at high schools.
Mm-hmm.
So, so, you know,
Oh yeah.
that's all I have to say about that.
Well, I appreciate it very, very much.
Mm,
You have a lot of insight in a lot of different areas and a lot of wisdom. um, to share. And I think it's very important that people hear it because right now, a lot of all we're hearing is all the problems that we have. Well, I think it's about time we start thinking about learning about the problem, but also learning about the solution and implementing those
Mm-hmm.
solutions.
Mm-hmm.
And you have great insight for that. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, especially with your Twitch channel yourself, like you are putting it into practice.
Praxis. That's what they say. It's
Yes.
praxis. Yeah, it does need to be put implemented, and I'm all about let's talk if we're gonna come up with a plan. I have solutions. Let's talk about which ones we want, not whether we want to have them. Let's talk about what to do. So I'm always talking to follow up with how about we try to get a parents meeting together or let's do a panel, all right, about with the parents and their kids and let's actually talk about it. You have children, bring them on. You have children and they have parents and they have friends and let's bring them on and talk about it.
That actually would be a really good idea.
Yeah, with the
Uh,
parents' supervision.
yeah.
Maybe
I mean,
audio
obviously,
only. I don't know how. Right. I know you protect their
parents
privacy, but
involved.
yeah, let's bring them on. Let's bring that voice in because that's the other voice no one ever listens to is the kids.
Exactly. And they're the ones, they deal with all sorts of things that we don't see
Right.
as an adult. And, and it's funny because you're talking about this, like, we have all these adults talking about, we need to talk to our kids about this. We need to talk to our kids about this. But we're talking to each other about talking to our kids instead
Oh
of
yeah,
talking to our kids.
perfect. Well, you're doing your best. Okay, we need to be better.
Yeah. Doing your best doesn't necessarily mean, I mean, it means, yeah, you're doing your best and we are doing our best. But that always means there's room for improvement. You can
Sure.
always do better. There are always things that we can change or, you know, talk more about or whatever. Um,
Your
but I think you're right, you know,
your child will always be growing until. So yes, you must always do better.
and they need to be heard too.
Yeah, God knows they get the weirdest things in their. I mean, they get the strangest ideas in their little heads too, and you're like, wow, where did you get that? Well, on my internet.
Oh yeah. And then they also come up with things that are completely unexpected and
Original.
like completely and amazing and
Yeah.
like and I think adults forget that just because we're adults doesn't mean we can't learn something.
hmm
And that a lot of times some of the greatest lessons that I have learned have come from my kids.
Um, an adult is expected to know.
Mhm.
It's too much pressure. An adult
Right.
learns with their children because they have to learn their children,
Yeah.
but they also have to teach.
Yeah.
A parent is everything. All institutions come from parents. So we don't need institutions and states and governments. We need good parents.
Right. Today, I know it's very easy to allow the electronics, to allow TV and all of that to kind of be the babysitter. And we're in such a fast paced world. And I think it's time that we need to sit and have the uncomfortable conversations because this is the world that we live in. And we need to be able to prepare our kids for it and walk in it together with them, not separate.
You definitely need to walk in it together. You can't let them go now. Uh,
Oh, absolutely
it's
not.
all gone to hell in a handbag, so they don't get to have that.
Right.
Yeah. And
But I think,
it's time to interrupt the video game because this is the reality.
yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely. See, learning new things every day. And
Mm.
there's a lot going on in the world, but there's a lot of hope too. A lot of scary things, but
Parents,
you know,
parents, parents won't let good parents protect and defend
yep.
what matters most, which is the potential that all life really has and love.
Yeah.
So the hope isn't with the children of the future, it's with their parents.
Mhm.
So everything's reversed and backwards now
Right.
because it's been all perverted. So,
Gotta start somewhere though.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
Yep.
hopefully one of these days, we'll completely get there. But, you know,
you
starts here, starts now with us,
you
like you
just
said.
hope your kids stay alive and well long enough to start families of their own, and you've pretty much done your job. You know, that's all you can hope for.
Exactly.
Yeah. Um.
Exactly.
I know there was one other thing we were talking about. Justice.
Yes.
So, you were talking about teshuva.
Yeah.
All right.
I
And
had spoken with somebody about that, and you had mentioned that um there's
yeah,
an indigenous approach also.
yeah, reconciliation. We call it reconciliatory justice. This is
Okay.
where um, through, and I was teaching the model for reaching consensus and telling the participants this, that even in the criminal justice aspect of our societies, what would happen is you have a criminal, somebody who committed harm, violated something, whatever they've done, they're actually brought into counsel with the victims, the people they've harmed, and they are allowed to speak first, so that everybody listens to them first before they
Okay.
decide what they feel should be proposed in terms of rectifying it. And then they worked in consensus to reach an agreement. Will you accept the terms of the reconciliation or not? You know,
Mm-hmm.
and so we have what they call redemption. We don't want to lose anyone. We will absolutely bend over backwards, turn ourselves inside out, trying to understand somebody and give them a solution to work with the community again, make it right again, be a part of the community again. We need you. So we don't have a punitive justice system,
Gotcha.
but it happens with consensus. The person committing the harm has to agree that they want to make it right and that they will go along with the recommendations in terms of what is the best way to rectify it. Everyone involved agrees, and the entire community is involved in it. So there are alternative philosophies and cultures that are alive and well today that exist that give people options. If you think you're trapped in your own propaganda, if you think you're trapped by your own culture or your own race or people, you're not. If you
Right.
think everything's black and white and all or nothing, you're wrong.
Yep.
You can be forgiven. No one wants to lose their son or daughter because of their beliefs. Of all
Right.
things, because of their beliefs. So if you went to the dark side, yes, you can come back. Somebody out there wants you back.
Right.
And if you don't have anybody in your own people, come to us.
Exactly.
Borrow us and make your way home. Because we're really good at helping people find their way home. We have survived 500 years and we're still here.
Right.
So, no, you're not trapped. Yes, you can be forgiven. No, all is not lost. But no
There's
one
hope.
said that facing up to what you've done is easy.
Exactly.
It will remain with you for the rest of your life, longer than the injury did to your victim. I mean, but there are alternatives, and there are other philosophies, and there are other beliefs. You know, so
It's pretty cool.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
interesting to know because, a lot of times we're taught it's either black or white. It's either this way or no way. And you're right. There are other ways. There is, you know, there is a way back. But like you
hmm
said, that doesn't mean there aren't consequences and that, it won't stay with you. There's still consequences for actions, but that doesn't mean all is lost either.
no, it does not. It just means you have to learn how to deal with shame,
Mm,
which obviously no one joins an extremist supremacist group with the intent to feel shame.
right,
That's not what you signed up for. But shame means you have the conscience to feel embarrassed for having hurt someone. It means you have empathy and compassion, and that's all you need.
mm,
Find your open mindedness, find your heart, take your humanity back,
mm,
learn to be heard, and do what it takes to make it right. It's all you can do.
right,
But your own people may not have that solution. So look outside them to other people who do. Just like children should diversify their friends.
right.
Yeah, an extremist is stuck because they can't look outside their own people. That's really what's killing them.
Mm,
It's like genetic bottlenecking. You know, the gene pool gets so small, they can't diversify and they can't adapt and they can't survive.
right.
So, yeah. But that was, yeah, so that's one alternative justice system. And so I'm looking forward to seeing your podcast on Teshuvah because um, one of my main chief concerns is alternative dispute resolution and
Oh, wow. Yeah.
cultural justice systems. Uh,
Mm,
how we handle criminal justice and constitutional, etc., justice systems,
right.
especially where justice does not involve revenge or punishment. I don't believe in punishment. That militant activist does not mean we want vengeance. That's not what makes us militant. It's that we're afraid for our lives and we have nothing left to lose. And we're afraid for our children and our mothers and our elders and those that we love. And it means that somebody had to do something. It was the last resort. So justice, not revenge. Just like that
And
woman
justice
said.
is, go ahead. Sorry.
There was a woman, BLM activist, and she said, "You're lucky we want justice and not revenge." In this rant that she went off on
Mhm.
after all this time, "You're lucky we want justice, not revenge." And I'm like, "Yep, justice, not revenge." That's what we need to work toward.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know,
Okay.
every day.
Well, I know it's late for you, Mom.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. It was very enlightening. It was awesome. I
Yeah.
don't know how else to put it. I mean, I even learned a lot, and
Ah,
which I'm
wow.
always learning no matter what anyway. But it's for me, I love hearing. the stories of others and their trials and their tribulations, and learning what I can do or what I can restrain from doing
Mm.
to help along in that journey, and to be able to teach my kids to, you know, be better human beings and everything. So thank you very much for, you know, joining me and answering my questions and sharing your journey. I appreciate it a lot.
You have good
I think it's
questions.
very important. So thank you.
Oh, no, thank you for sitting down with me so late at night. And we've had a very small, very quiet chat, deadly silent chat, but I think it's because they're listening,
I do
because the
believe it is.
moderators are still here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, okay. I will look forward to the opportunity to talk to you as soon as possible again.
Yes.
Um,
Yes, please.
and as we say, it's Kitwam Kwapa Mitten, which is we'll see each other again if we are alive and well.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Hey, did you get to see that? Hold on, let me turn the stream off so we can save the VOD and then come right back on.